Enjoy the webinar. Yeah, I can see the screen. And now I can see the presentation. Fantastic. So I'll hand over to you now. Enjoy.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for that lovely introduction and getting us going. So like Melissa said, we're talking about gentle discipline and its applications in the ELT classroom. So basically how we can use it in the classroom. I want you, as we go through the presentation or the session, whatever questions you have or challenges you feel might come up when using this approach, to put those in the Q&A section so I can have a look as we go. That will sort of help me maybe answer some questions as we go as well and save time in the end. Okay, so what is gentle discipline? In a nutshell, it's a very broad topic, but in a nutshell, it is about understanding the brain of the child and the teenager and altering neural pathways. We'll talk more about neural pathways during the rest of the session. But basically, it's looking at the science of the brain and then approaching discipline or behavioral issues from that perspective. One of the key points of gentle discipline is to address the cause of the behavior as opposed to the behavior itself. And I feel that a lot of teachers and possibly parents react to behavior. But the point of gentle discipline is to understand or try and understand where the behavior is coming from and what the need is. Here are 5 words that I kind of put together to help us use the approach. So gentle discipline is creating space to listen. So that's the first one. We listen to the what the child is saying or what the teenager is saying, and then we try to understand where these emotions are coming from. So we listen to what the emotion is, we kind of help them name the emotion, and then we try to understand where it's coming from and what the need is. And then we work on regulating emotions. We help the child regulate their emotions, but we also have to be mindful of how we regulate our emotions. So the way the teacher regulates their emotions is really important, because that needs to be the first step before you are then able to take care of the child and show them how to regulate their emotions. The 4th one is to negotiate. And what I mean here is to sort of talk to the child or the student about, what's happening and what we can do as a solution. So what can we do in that moment to address the situation, and what can we do, in future. So we basically look at strategies, and we'll talk about this more when we look at our classroom examples. And then the last one is to act. And by this, I mean, we sort of act towards that solution that we agreed on. Gentle discipline is a long-term solution, as Melissa mentioned. So we think about how we can carry out our solution that we have negotiated over the long term and, in the future when the need becomes apparent again. So that's gentle discipline in a nutshell. Moving on, let's look at the working of the brain. What are 3 adjectives to describe the brain? There are 3 adjectives that start with the letter C. If you could put your answers in chat, please. They are adjectives and they start with the letter C. So I have cognition, okay, cognitive, complex, creative, curious, cognitive again, collaboration, comprehension, complicated, conscience, complex, creative, cognitive. I see flexible a few times, which doesn't start with C, but is a good answer. Communicate. And I see comprehension. Okay. Some of them are correct. So let's have a look. The first one is changing. The brain is continuously changing. So we have two parts in our brain. We have the reptilian brain, which is responsible for emotions. It's the reactive brain, okay? And then we have this is also called the downstairs brain. And then we have the more mature upstairs brain, which is responsible for logical thinking, emotional awareness, and so on. So when we react to a situation, if we are not trained to react from our upstairs brain, we will react from our reptilian brain. And the important thing here to remember for the classroom is that the upstairs brain is not fully developed until a person turns 20, so in their 20s. And when we're talking about the classroom situation, we're dealing with children, so they're well below 20, and their natural response is to react from their reptilian brain. But we, as the adults in the classroom, the responsibility then is on us to respond from the more mature part of our brain. And one way to do this is called mindsight. So you basically ask, why are they doing this? Why is this child behaving this way? So I'll give you a classroom example. I teach secondary literacy. I've been teaching for many years, and I have my phone policy in class basically is to kind of pass the responsibility onto the students in how they use their phone. Usually this hasn't caused any problems in class, but one time it did, where I had a student who was continuously using his phone, to the point that when he needed to put it away and listen, he wouldn't. So it bothered me, and I was not mindful enough to respond. Instead, I reacted, which was my mistake. And I put us in a situation where we were in conflict with each other. Eventually, someone stepped in to speak to him, and it was sorted. But looking back, what I should have done is asked, why is he using his phone? And the answer to this would be something like, maybe, this is how he's concealing his insecurity. It was a teenager class, so teenagers can feel insecure. It was a literacy class, so that's the lowest level. And it was probably just his way of coping with the anxiety and the stress of it all. And then my response should have been to, address the stress and the anxiety rather than the phone. And the lesson to take away from this is to put yourself in the shoes of your student. I know that we say it a lot, put yourself in, their shoes. But the effect that it has on classroom management and your relationship with your students is so great that it is such important advice to put yourself in the shoes of your student. So that's the first C, changing. The second one is complex. I think some of you said this, the brain is indeed complex. And so because the brain is complex, we can train the brain. So students who are below 20 years of age would respond from their reptilian brain, but we can model to them how to respond from their upstairs brain. And in this way, we sort of exercise their upstairs brain. So we exercise their rational thinking and their emotional regulation and their logical thinking. And one way to do this is to sort of sit them down, sit with them and help them name the feelings that they're feeling, whether it's sad or angry or frustrated or whatever it is. And this allows you to sort of validate their feelings. It allows you to listen. And most importantly, it gives you the opportunity to train them on how to manage their emotions and how to meet their needs so that it does not result in, behavior problems. So changing, complex, and changeable. This is the third C. The brain is changeable. I'm sure a lot of you being in education have heard of the term neuroplasticity, which means that the brain can be wired to respond a certain way. So when neurons fire together, they are wired together. And the thing to remember with this is that it's important to make experiences positive, because if an experience is continuously negative, then the response to it, or the response to the thought of it, will become negative. And so it's really important to be intentional in how you address, classroom behavioral issues, and to make the experiences positive intentionally. Another classroom example for you. I had a class of primary students. They were 6 to 8-year-olds, and one of the girls in the class, she was at like the lower age range, so she struggled a little bit compared to the other students. She had a brother in the class as well, and her brother was a little bit older. And I used to give stars to students when they, had achieved something that day, or we had a point system. So based on points, I would give stars. And the brother got a star and the sister didn't get a star. So she was upset about it. And everyone's like, packing their things, and we're getting ready to leave, and the class is noisy, and she comes up to me and she's like, I'm trying to settle everyone, and she comes up to me and she's like, teacher, I want a star. So I could have reacted and in the heat of the moment been like, no star for you today, try again later, or try again next time, go and pack your things now, which seems like a normal response. But I wanted to be more intentional about it and be more positive about it. So first I validated her emotions and I said, I know that you want a star. And then I encouraged her and I told her, you're really good. You've done some really good work today. And I'm sure in the next lesson, you will get a star. And that was enough. And she just went back to her seat. In previous experiences, I would have kids kind of, keep insisting that they get a star. But with this particular student, all she needed was to be validated, just to be heard. And that was enough. So, and also what's important to remember is next time she has a need, she's not going to be afraid to come to me and tell me that this is what she wants, or this is her need. And that's the whole point of making a situation positive. So continuous positive experiences in the classroom will have like a really big impact on student behavior. All right, so those are the 3 C's: changing, complex, and changeable. Moving on, punishments. I decided to put in a section here about punishments because we turn to a lot of different ways of punishment when we discipline students, and I kind of want to highlight the ones that are, not okay in the gentle discipline approach. Okay, but first, I'm going to take you back to your childhood. So think back to a time when you were punished as a child or a teenager. What had you done wrong, and how did your teacher respond? If you're able to put some answers in chat, that would be great, so we can see what some of your experiences have been like. But I think it's important to think about this because it really helps with your perspective as a teacher. And it's one of the things that inspired me to go into gentle discipline in the first place, my experiences with teachers in the past. But while you're putting your answers in chat, I will give you an example from from my childhood. I must have been about 7 or 8. I think I was in grade 2, as we call it here. And I had a teacher that taught me a foreign language. And we had to memorize poems in this language and recite them out to her in class, like in front of the whole class. And if we were unable to, the teacher would make us stand on the chair for the rest of like the period, you know, which was embarrassing. And if you're 7 or 8, it can feel really, really difficult. So it made me feel very frustrated with myself mostly, because I felt like I wasn't able to do it. And I remember a lot of times during homework time at home, I would feel really, really anxious and stressed about it. It was very daunting for me. I chose this particular example because it's also reflective of how it affects the students' perception of something. So I actually liked poetry, and I still write poetry to this day. In fact, I studied English literature in university, so I love poetry. And if the teacher had made an effort to, you know, make the students understand the poem and like the poem, then it would have been much easier to do for the student to memorize the poem. So that's why I put it there. And the last question is, how did it affect my behavior? It made me have negative associations with the language itself that I was being taught. It was not English, it was another language. And it also affected my relationship with teachers in general and made me very sort of skeptical of teachers. And that's what happens to students when they have negative experiences with teachers. They sort of become closed off. And then it takes a really long time and a lot of effort to kind of, you know, crack the shell a little bit. So yeah. I don't know if anyone's put anything in chat. Oh, here's one. I knew a teacher who made her students stand up and stay so all the class. Where did it go? I lost it. Oh, so all the class through because they hadn't read a chapter from their from their home reading. Yeah, things like that, you know. We were asked to spell a word. The teacher had high expectations, but I could only spell halfway correctly, and I was made to stand on a chair. There are some really interesting punishments that teachers, well, when I was growing up, that teachers would you know, would use. Teacher went out of the class for some work and said to be indisciplined. She returned after a couple of minutes, but the teacher that was in the next room complained that the class was making noise, and she punished the whole class, made us stand and hit us with the ruler on the knuckles 4 times. I remember that happening to me as a child too. They would make you put your fist like that, and then they would hit you there with the ruler. It was very painful. It was very painful. And now as a teacher, I know it was very unnecessary. So yeah, that I hope that helped you kind of, you know, put discipline into perspective and consider how you go about disciplining your students. The 2 that I want to talk about for this session, these 2 are quite common, and we sort of discuss them a lot as teachers. One of them is aggressive enforcement. And by aggressive, I don't mean physical aggression. I just mean sort of, you know, being forceful about a punishment. And then the second one is timeouts, which during my time as a teacher, I got into lots of discussions with other teachers about, you know, the usefulness of timeouts. So aggressive enforcement. I had a secondary literacy class, like I told you, and I tried the gentle discipline approach with this class. And it was not easy because they were more responsive to things like, I'll call your parents, or, you know, you get extra homework or something like that. And the fact is, those punishments give you short-term results. They don't give you long-term results, because they take away the opportunity to train the student to be responsible, to manage their emotions, to understand their emotions. And so that's why I don't use those as punishments now. What I do instead is I model what I want. So if a student is having a bad day and acts out, then in class, where everyone can see us, I would sit with the student and I would, I would ask what was going on. And when they see you accepting and they see you validating, they become more accepting and more validating of themselves and of their peers. So that's really important to remember. And if you respect them, they will respect you back. And you need to show that you respect them for them to respect you back. That is super important in class. The second one is timeouts. The naughty corner. This was very common. So a child misbehaves and then they have to go sit in the naughty corner. And we expect them to think about what they have done. So go sit there and think about what you have done. And a lot of teachers and parents do this with children as young as like 5, 6, 7-year-olds. The main issue with this, though, and when I read this in Ockwell Smith, I was mind blown. But the main issue with this is, how would they think about what they have done if they hadn't been taught how to think about what they had done? So you put them in the naughty corner and you expect them to activate their upstairs brain on their own and think about what they have done. They haven't seen you do it, so they have no model, and they haven't been walked through it, so they do not know the process. Instead, what they would do is sit in the naughty corner and just be angry. And then they would feel like, I shouldn't be angry because I'm the one who did something wrong and I deserve to be punished. That's like the suggestive message that they are getting. And it also affects their self-worth, because the idea is, if you do not comply, then you cannot be included. And in a classroom, this is very important, because if a student misbehaves and you put them in the naughty corner, then they are missing out on the rest of, whatever the class is doing, on the game or the activity. And they feel like, so I'm not worth, classroom time if I misbehave. So it's very important that your punishments don't affect a student's self-esteem or their self-worth, but rather, and I said this before, validates their emotions and helps them manage it. And again, take it as an opportunity to train their brain. So children need to be taught to reflect on their emotions rather than be excluded for them. Okay. Let's look at a case study. A class of 6 to 8-year-olds. Students are completing a simple ask and answer in a word task, filling out a worksheet as they go. This is a literacy level, so it was a very simple worksheet task where they would just have to go around and ask each other, what's your name? And then sort of find the person's name and trace it. Student A is sitting at his desk and forcefully scribbling across the table with a pencil, and his worksheet lies on the floor. From a gentle discipline approach, how would you respond? And notice I say respond and not react, because we respond when we are disciplining. Can you put your responses in chat? So the student is scribbling on the table with a pencil, very forcefully, note that, and has forgotten about his worksheet. What would your first response be? Go to the student and ask why they're doing that. Take the student aside and talk to them. Find out what the problem is, redirect them. Ask why. So I see responses for trying to understand what's going on. That's good. What happened? Why? What's going on? Why are you doing that? Ask politely. Very important to ask politely. Okay, what's wrong with the worksheet? Good point. Okay. Maybe he hasn't understood the activity, correct. Okay, try to find the emotion. All right, so good answers. One thing I didn't point out is that, so I said it's a literacy class, but I don't speak the language of the student. So the student was an Arabic speaker and I don't speak Arabic. So we had a language barrier. I did have a teaching assistant in the class, but she was not in the class when it happened. So I had to tackle the situation without language, which meant I couldn't really ask why. Although asking the student what's going on is a good approach. Then the student knows that you want to listen. So with this particular student, I went up to him and the first thing I told him was it's okay, because I wanted him to know that whatever is happening, like we're going to manage it, and I'm not mad at him for scribbling across the table, because I was actually told by another student that he was scribbling across the table, and when I looked, I could tell that this boy was afraid that I would react negatively. So I had to be very mindful, and I said it's okay. And then I took an eraser and I gave it to him. The reason I did this was because I was trying to exercise natural consequences. So here's what you did, and this is a consequence of it. So now you're going to have to clean it up. And it's a normal, natural consequence, and it doesn't feel like a punishment, because that's what happens when there's a mess. You have to clean it up. And that's a really good thing to remember with gentle discipline, that try to make the consequences as related as possible. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why a punishment like standing on the chair for not knowing a poem doesn't work, because one, it shames you, and two, it is not a natural consequence. So I gave him the eraser. He starts erasing, but it's very difficult for him. So I get another one and I start erasing with him. So we're cleaning up together. And the reason I did that is so that he knows that if he's in trouble or if he's in a bad place, it's okay. And I'm going to help him. And I wanted him to sort of see that I don't dislike him for what he has done, or I don't want to punish him for what he has done, but I just want us to kind of figure it out. And he doesn't have to be excluded, and he can still have help even though he has misbehaved. And then after that, I picked up the worksheet and I asked him if we could do it together. And he said, okay. So we did a few of the, sections, or like the first 2 or 3, we did them together. And then I asked him to do it on his own. But he wasn't so keen on it. So I thought, okay, he's done 1, 2, and 3. Let's leave it at that. And then the takeaway from that for me was to notice the skill development required. So in this case, maybe some downtime for students like him who kind of get frustrated because the task is too difficult, or just they're exhausted after school and so can't keep working. So some downtime, some playtime, maybe some something easier, or a choice of task or something like that would have really helped in this situation. Do we have time for another case study?
Yeah, I think we do, Zahra.
All right. So here's another one, a class of 8 to 10-year-olds. Again, this is a primary literacy class. So I couldn't speak Arabic. Students are engaged in an activity using mini whiteboards. Student B is trying to pull out the metal frame of his mini whiteboard, causing a child safety issue and not working on the task. How would you respond in chat, please? So what would you say to this student who keeps pulling out the metal frame from his whiteboard? Okay, so why are you doing that? Discuss with him and have him proceed to the task, okay? Any other responses? Ask the other students, okay? Oh no, what's going on? Yeah, immediate intervention. Ask him to stop and to concentrate. Any problem, let me help you. Explain the consequences. He gets to write on normal paper. Explain that it can be dangerous. Maybe it was an accident, yes. Not to make assumptions too quickly, yes. Why do we do it? We need to stop the action. Okay. Right. So one of the things that came up there is to ask in front of the whole class, which is tricky because it really depends on the class and the student. So I know for me growing up, I would not have liked to be put on the spot and be told, you know, why are you doing that? But some students wouldn't mind. So it's really important to know that first before you do something like that. Let's see what I have. This one was actually much easier for me to manage than the previous one. One, I had a TA, so she did the translating for me, and I told her to be very specific in how she translated and only translate exactly what I say. And the first thing that we did was to ask him, you know, I mean, I didn't see the need to ask him why he was doing it, or to ask him, you know, if he knew whether it was okay to do it or not, because I felt he was old enough to already know that. So I asked him, you know, why is it not okay to do that? Like, you know, it's not okay to do that. But why is it not okay to do that? And he said, because it doesn't belong to me. The board doesn't belong to me. Correct. So he understands that he's not supposed to do that. And then I asked him, so I also, this is important, I also pointed out the safety issue, which one of you mentioned in chat. And I said, okay, I couldn't quite get him to say what he was feeling because he was not a very expressive student. He didn't talk a lot. He would talk to himself, but when he was spoken to, he was not very responsive. So I couldn't get him to say, you know, what he was feeling. But I was able to, you know, negotiate a solution with him. And I said, well, like, what do we do now? Like, what can we do about it? And then he immediately said, give me an A3 paper instead of the whiteboard. And so that's accountability, that's taking responsibility. And I thought, you know, okay, that's great. So we got him an A3 sheet, and that's what he used for that lesson. And in the next lesson, I asked him, I asked him, do you want an A3 sheet today or do you want a whiteboard today? And he said he wanted a whiteboard. And that was it. He never pulled the frame out again. And he, in future lessons as well, he worked with a whiteboard, and it was fine. And these two case studies that I've mentioned here, these two students have really been like success stories for me with using gentle discipline, because I taught them for a whole year, and over the course of the year, I saw them changing, and I saw them becoming more responsive and becoming more responsible and working more, and, you know, being able to sort of ask for what they need more. And it was really, really good to see. So yeah, that's what I did with this particular student. All right, that's all I have. I hope I didn't go too fast through everything, but I wanted to get through everything. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the QA section now.
Thanks so much, Zahra. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A section, so take your time to read through them, and I'll do that too. Everyone, there's still a chance to leave a question for her, because we've got enough time to answer them. I know that people are really interested in how they can do this, so let's take a look. First of all, before we start with the questions, everyone is saying thank you so much. So I want to say that too. It's a really interesting webinar full of like practical ideas, and thank you for sharing your real experiences with us.
I think it's really important to apply sort of what you learn to yourself, and to go back to your childhood when you're trying to deal with students. Because we forget, we grow up and we forget what it was like to be a child.
Yeah, we really do. Who was the person that first, or how did you first get interested in this topic? Who taught you about this?
I actually was, it's a very personal story. I was thinking of, I was going to be a parent. And so I wanted to raise my children right. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to be a perfect parent. I know we can't be perfect, but you know, we can do our best. And that's how I got into gentle parenting. And then I thought this would work in the classroom. So
yeah, that makes sense. I see that lots of the books about this are, maybe some of them are written for parents and some for teachers and some both. Is that right?
yeah, some of them, but a lot of the ones that I've read are actually for parenting, but it's so transferable. It's a little bit difficult because we don't see them every day. We see them for a few hours a week, but it is very transferable. And if you have them for like a long time, over weeks, you do see a difference.
So how often do you have your classes? Do you see them once a week for a few hours, or do you see them a few times a week?
So it's 3 hours a week, and some groups I see 3 hours one day, and some groups I see 90 minutes 2 days.
Do you see a difference with the different groups? Like if you meet them more regularly, is it easier to implement this long-term approach? That's what I'm starting to think about.
If you saw them regularly, then it would be much easier, because they're in that environment more often. But there is, you know, there is a thing where like once you come into the classroom environment, you sort of, you know, you become a part of the environment. So whatever you do outside is different. That's the whole point of setting up a classroom environment, right? And in like a culture in the classroom. So they just like snap back into it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's look at the Q&A from all our participants. Those were my personal questions. You can stop sharing your slides now, Zahra, and that means we can be easier for you to see the Q&A. So let's take a question from Irena. Irena says she has 25 students. And someone else says, Fatima says she has 46 students. Could this work with larger classes? What's your thoughts on that?
So I'm not going to sugarcoat it, because definitely with smaller groups, it's much easier. And definitely with quieter groups, it's much easier. If you have a TA or a co-teacher, then also it's much easier. So naturally, it would be more challenging with larger classes. And in my context, I haven't really tried it. I haven't had the opportunity to try it. But what I do know for sure is that the way the teacher is reflects among the students. And I know this from teachers that I have had growing up in school. Yes, I had a bad relationship with, a lot of my teachers, but there were the one or two teachers that actually made a difference. And we were large classes of like 25 to 30 girls. And the teachers who came into class that were calm and understanding and treated you like people rather than, students, they were very easy to get along with. And because they respected you, you did what they asked because you respected them. So the way that you are really reflects. And I think that it's also a good idea to do your behavioral, like to deal with your behavioral problems. So to talk to the student who's misbehaving in class where like everyone can see, so that you obviously you should be careful not to shame them and not to make them feel bad about it, but to sort of go like, are you okay today? Is something happening? Do you need some downtime? Should we take a break? Maybe we can play a game for a bit and then come back to the task. And the students see your understanding, and it just makes them more receptive. So if they are having a bad day, then they know they can just tell you, teacher, today's not a good day for me. Can I sit this out? And so to teach them how to communicate and teach them that you are present as a teacher for them to be able to.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's the whole classroom culture, and I suppose that from the very first week, that's important, isn't it? I read some of a book. I admit not all of the book, by Paul Dix, I think his name is, and it says when the adult changes, the children do too. And I think some of the writers you mentioned today, that sounds like a similar concept, that from the first day we need to think about our attitude. Someone in the chat and in the Q&A called Rara teaches young adult learners. So maybe they're thinking of university age, 18, 19, 20, 21. Can you apply kind of the gentle discipline techniques to that age group?
That's a good question. And I saw a similar one about if you're dealing with students who are 20 and above, because we said that that's when the brain is fully developed. Can we? I think we can. And I say that because I've done it, like with myself, because we learn, we grow, we give ourselves the space to do that. So showing to the students or showing, the young adults how to do it, it's kind of like when you give them skills, so in English language teaching, you give them writing skills, or you give them critical thinking skills, or creative thinking skills. So it's kind of the same. You give them, you know, emotional regulation skills, logical thinking skills, self-reflection skills. And I imagine it would, in a way, be easier to do it with young adults, as they're adults and their understanding of themselves is greater than a child's understanding of themselves would be.
Yeah, true. And actually, I teach that age group, and I can see that happening. Especially, you talked about kind of seeing what skills development is required. Like when someone can't do something, you recommended you to sit down with them and help them. And I think as an adult, I go to language classes as an adult, and I appreciate when my teacher does that, definitely. Yeah. Let's see, another question from Lynn Pham says, when do you have the time to sit with students and share stories or problems? Is it always in class or sometimes after class?
Yeah. Time is always a thing for teachers, right? Because we're trying to get to the end of the term having done everything that we were supposed to do. And yeah, so sometimes it would happen outside of class, like it did with the boy in case study 2 that I told you about, but I stepped out as well. So I guess the rest of the class kind of got a little break. Sometimes it would happen in class, as I did with the younger boy that I spoke about. And sometimes it would happen after class, you know. And I think it really depends on the situation. So with the younger boy, the situation needed to be remedied immediately, because he was clearly frustrated. He needed some, you know, he needed some support. And so I had to stop and I had to help him. But sometimes it can sort of maybe wait until after class, or you might need someone else there to be with you when you talk to them because of a language barrier or something like that. You might want to get, you know, another teacher involved if you need advice or something like that. So it really depends on the situation and how you feel it would work for the student. Yeah, I hope that answers.
Yeah, every case is individual, isn't it? So it depends on what you can do. If you speak with students L1, if you think it's something that the other students in the class should hear or not. Maybe the student is shy and doesn't want to share their problems in front of other people. Yeah. There's an interesting question from Hanazi Najib, who says, what advice do you have for educators who might face resistance or skepticism from parents or colleagues or school administrators about the use of gentle discipline in the classroom? So maybe you have a head teacher that says that you should give punishment. Tricky.
I have had conversations with other teachers where they have disagreed with some of, you know, the way I do things in class, you know, which is normal. But they haven't been enforcers though. So if it's a head teacher, then I imagine you have to answer to them. So my first question would be, do you have to involve the head teacher in every situation? Because oftentimes you can just manage it, you know, in class and it's fine. And over time, the effect of it will result in better, you know, in success for the student. So it will result in better learning. It will result in a better learning environment. And I don't quite see a reason for a parent to come in and be like, you should have punished my child, you know?
Yeah, hopefully you're getting better results as
Yeah.
a because of this, and the child is more interested because they feel closer to you and a nicer class culture. Yeah, hopefully, Hanadi, things would be better. Yeah, yeah. I will take maybe two more questions. One of them comes up twice from Katja Bignon and Anna Fondakova, and they both would like to know what else they can read on this topic. You mentioned Ockwell Smith as a book.
Mhm.
Is there any other book or author? This might be a difficult question for you to think off the top of your head just now, but yeah, if you can remember. If not, we can send some information later in the chat.
Yeah, there is one book that I would recommend. It's, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Is it okay if I share screen again?
Yeah, sure.
I can show my references list. So the first one, I'm not going to try and pronounce the name because I don't know how. But how to talk so kids will listen, and listen so kids will talk. This has been really helpful to me in sort of understanding the language to use, and the language to expect, and how to have the conversation, because that's the difficult part. You can listen, you can understand, you can come up with a solution and all of that, but the difficult part is having that conversation, because kids don't know how to have that conversation. So when you go into that conversation, it's good for you to be able to know how to have that conversation, so you can model it for them. So that's one that definitely I would recommend. And they have a series. I haven't read the other books, but they're on my list of books to get. So they have a series as well. So that's definitely something to look into.
It's a great title, a really good
Yeah.
title.
Yeah.
Was that written for parents and teachers, or could it apply to anyone?
For parents, it was written for parents, but it's so transferable to the classroom. And it's written so nicely because there's like comics. So it's like fun reading. There's like comics and reflective exercises and stuff. So it's a really good book.
That sounds great. That sounds really good. So yeah, you can take a look at these references, and we'll also share them. I think one or two of them are on your handout, so make sure everyone to download Zahra's handout. It's got kind of a summary of gentle discipline and some of the main ideas, and I think it's got a couple of the references too. Let's take one question. Let's see if there's any that we haven't addressed. Mulu Linda asks, what would you do with a student who still doesn't concentrate or do things after you've tried some of these techniques? Have you sadly ever had a case that you couldn't solve, or who did you ask for help after that?
It happens sometimes. And there might be other issues that you don't know about, just things happening at home, or, self-esteem issues, or I haven't encountered one myself. But having lived as a teenager during some of my life, there have been times where teachers have tried to sort of reach out to me, and I was unresponsive. And it was just because I was going through my own thing at the time, as a lot of young people do in their lives, especially in their teenage years. They go through a lot of things. And what I would have wanted from those teachers or all my teachers in general, was maybe just some space and some understanding. Not the expectation of results, or not the expectation of, doing what you expect me to do, or what you want me to do, or what my parents want me to do, but sort of just to understand that I'm going through something and that I just need the space to go through that.
That's really great advice, Zahra. I've just noticed the time and we have to leave it here. So thanks everyone for your participation, sharing your stories. Thanks, Zahra, for all your advice and answering the questions. We hope to have you back another time. Everyone, we're going to take a break now, but come back in 15 minutes because we'll have the third webinar today, which is creating your own learning materials in 6 easy steps with Desi Duranova. But once again, thank you so much, Zahra. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.